Testing, testing. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Wendy from JLL, and I am the GBA Growth Director in the Value and Risk team. So before I kickstart today's conversation, I would like to introduce our panelists to you first. So first, sitting to me, our gentleman Blake. He is the founding partner of Acre, and in Asia, Homa, a private equity platform that is vertically integrated as a developer, owner, and operator with around 4 billion US AUM globally. He has spent 32 years in the real estate industry here in Asia, covering all aspects of the direct investment process. He is responsible for the expansion of Acre's platform initially in Southeast Asia and oversees Acre's flagship developments in Thailand. And last year, they won the ULI Award of Excellence under the Homa brand. So he lives in Singapore. Welcome to Hong Kong. So next we have Paul. Paul is the chair professor of population health at the Department of Social Work and Social Administration, associate dean of knowledge exchange and development at the Faculty of Social Sciences, and the director of the university's Hong Kong Jockey Club Center for Suicide Research and Prevention. His monograph is on understanding poverty in Hong Kong, which has won the 11th Hong Kong Book Prize held. He is serving as the chair of the research committee of the Family Planning Association of Hong Kong and various other associations. Last but not least, Charles. Charles is the project director of Hong Kong Council of Social Service. He is responsible for driving various social agenda, including social housing, palliative and also end-of-life care, and the like for welfare sector in this council. In the past several years, he supported the council to pilot the transitional housing projects in order to set the examples for the government to identify alternative affordable housing for those on the waiting list. These projects include using idle private properties and also land to provide transitional social housing. Okay, so let us recap the objective of this panel for today. So what we want to do is first, we want to explore how housing needs are changing, and then what are the demographic gaps currently exist, and how we can fill those gaps with new and innovative housing styles, especially for the private sectors. Let me share a bit of context here. I think Hong Kong, we all agree, is not a static city. We are talking about Hong Kong people. We are dynamic, we are agile, we are energetic. It's same as for our population as well. In 1981, the population age was 26.3 years old. And then by now, our average age of our population is 47. And by the middle of this century, Hong Kong will be the oldest population in the world. But on the other hand, we can also see a lot of new foreign students coming to Hong Kong to study, to work, to live. And we have a net inflow of migration in Hong Kong as well. So with all this of all this great initiative taken by the Hong Kong government, what I want to open up for the first questions is to Paul. So just looking at how demographics has changed in Hong Kong over the last 20 years, what do you think it has been the most significant shift in the composition? And how do you think that affects the housing in the city?
Thank you, Wendy. I think it's a pleasure to come here to share some of our findings about our population study in Hong Kong. I still remember, I think 20 years ago when I served in the Family Planning Council. At that time, I think they still talk about the birth control, the contraception. But now, I think the government is coming to ask us, how can you help those people to have more babies now? And then when the latest census, it suggests to us that I think our household size has been coming down, I think from 4 to 3, and now it's 2.6. But now it's not 2.6, it's 2.6 plus a dogs or plus a cats or plus a tortoise. So I think the whole that we experience a very rapid demographic transition. I think we are talking about, we have 21% of our population age 65 or above. And then according to the United Nations, when we already reached what we call the super age societies. And also, based on the present trajectory, it is anticipated, I think we are going to have 36%, I think, of our population age 65 by 2046. So then what you can see, I think we are experiencing a very rapid demographic changes. And I always say aging is nothing new. You age, I age, right? But what happened in Hong Kong is just the magnitude and the speed. I think it takes France 100 years. I think the doubles is aging population from 7% to 14%. You know how long it takes in Hong Kong? It's only 25 years. So everything in Hong Kong, it happens fast, right? So it will leave us a very small window to respond, I think, to this changing. Okay, so, but our population growth, it is still growing, despite we have experienced what we call a natural, I think, negative growth. The number of birth, the number of death have outnumbered number of birth since 2020. So each year, based on the natural loss, I think we are losing 20,000 people. And we do not anticipate there will be any substantial changes, I think, in the future. So I think all our population growth in the future will be mainly contributed or supplemented by the migration, or hopefully by the gain of the migration. But when you see in the last 2 or 3 years, I think we've seen as so-called, there's a continuous outflow of the local talents, I think, to United Kingdom, to Australia, to other countries. I think just in UK, I think based on the Inland Office of the UK, I think from 2020, I think they have been issued about 180,000 visa to the Hong Kong BNO holders. And a majority of them, I think they age between 25 to 49, and most of them, they are economically active, they are professional, and then they are with their children. And these could be your market, I think, for the private market as well. But luckily, I think we have this foreign talent scheme. I think they're coming in. I think so last year, we have a net gain of the migration of 10,000. So what it means, suppose I think it is our estimation, I think there will be about 70,000 who left Hong Kong in 2023. So last year, so if we have a net gain of 10,000, so there will be 80,000, I think, coming from abroad, I think, to come to Hong Kong. Of course, the majority, they are mainlander, but since we still have some foreign national, I think, to come to Hong Kong. And these could be the very good market, I think, for the housing as well. So, however, that is about the size. One more thing I'd like to say is about the income disparity. I think in the last 20 years, I think our income gap between the top 90% and then the bottom 10%, it has grown much wider and wider now. You know what is the ratio between the top 10% and then the bottom 10% in Hong Kong? It is 57 times. 57 times. It could be one of you guys earning the top 10%, but there are many people, I think, who are at the bottom. And then according to the demography here, I think in Hong Kong is still the least affordable housing in Hong Kong. I think we are talking about 18.8 years. That's a price to the income ratio. That means a medium household apartment to the medium household income. Based on the latest statistic in the CNSD department, I think our medium household income is about $30,000. Now, if the $30,000 you multiply by 12, you multiply by 18.8, which is equivalent to about $6.7 million. Now, what apartment you can buy for a 6.7 million apartment? I think will be a one studio flat in Sheung Wan or two rooms apartment in Yunnan. It's nothing very, very affordable. So I think that is something that I think we have to bear in mind. I think if we are looking at the housing market and especially on the private market. In Hong Kong, I think our GDP is about 51 USD per month, which is equivalent to Germany. So we are not poor, but unfortunately, our wealth are so concentrated or so off balance. So I think in order to have a more balanced, housing market, I really hope, I think the wealth, can be shared, can be benefit more people, and such that everybody, can afford the housing. Just as one of your previous speakers say, we need to create some sort of ladder for the people from moving from 30% of the public housing to the home ownership scheme and then to the private housing. Once you build up this ladder, I think that will be good for the Hong Kong, the future development as well. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Paul. So Charles, I would also like to hear your observation. So you have been working in a lot of social work projects in the city. What is your observation?
Hello. Okay, thank you for having me here, and I will talking about some of the observation from our social welfare sector. Actually, has Paul mentioned that the aging population is expanding, and you will see that the population of the elderly people now is increasing to over 2 million after several years. And besides this, we also seeing that a lot of the people elderly actually dying. And we see that according to the 2023, there are 55,000 elderly died. So we actually need some of the housing to support the elderly aging in place and also provide palliative care for those who are living in the communities. So this kind of the housing market, you may consider about it. And the Hong Kong Council of Social Service in several years actually organized the expo to promote the general technology. This kind of the promotion actually try to helping the family, those elderly and also their carer to stay at home. So I think this big population or market, actually you can think about what sort of the housing you can design for those people. They have a lot of the needs, okay? Social connection needs, medical needs, etc. And then the second point is we also observe that a lot of the professionals coming from the mainland to Hong Kong. And according to the recent news, there is a talent admission plan, actually around 120,000 professionals from the most of them actually come from the mainland to the Hong Kong. And half of them actually is their children, is their children. So actually there is not only single professional coming to the Hong Kong, it's a whole family coming to Hong Kong. So in future, we have to think about what kind of the housing for them for their families to adapt to the Hong Kongs. So they not only lead a knowledge exchange among the professionals, but also the family adaptation to Hong Kong and build good relationship with local people. So that is you have to think about the special housing or has added value housing for this group of the people, and then build up the connection with the local community. And then the third one is the youngster in the population of the young population actually amounts to 700,000 youngsters living in Hong Kong, and among them 114,000 young people aged from the 20 to 30. They are poor, 140,000 poor. So as Paul mentioned that actually there is a very serious income disparity, And we have to think about what kind of the rental housing or co-living or etc. to satisfy these needs of the young population who want to have a personal space and personal development in Hong Kong. So we have to think about this kind of the population. Lastly, actually around 200,000 people living in the subdivided flat, as you know, that they are very poor people, and some of them living a entirely private housing. So I don't know whether the private developer has a role to play here or not, because most of private sector, actually they live in a private sector, and then this portion of private sector provide a very poor living conditions for the poor people. So I don't know whether the private sector has the role, but yeah, that's what I've observed here. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. I really can see there is a lot of significant change in terms of the population and also the demographics of our Hong Kong population. But let's talk about the housing here first. So when we talk about housing, what's the function of housing? The most fundamental is to give a shelter and a protection for our people. But more importantly, it's also have to match the needs of our diverse population pool. So I want to ask a question to Bragg. It's about, you have been working in a lot of different projects in other parts of the world. Have you seen this kind of demographic shift and how the housing can adapt and accommodate this kind of demographic changes?
Yeah, thanks. So hopefully I'm not like the slumlord private developer that Charles mentions, because we do operate in a private capacity, providing rental housing globally. But we try to do it in a way that creates all this community, which we'll talk about later. But in terms of demographic shifts, I think we've seen certainly, if we kind of step back, even look at very, very established markets like the US market, where we can see recently, because, whether it's kind of COVID related or not, we've seen, using recent examples of people working from home. It created a different demand in housing. If you look at the US market, 50% of the market approximately rents their housing. So it's, everybody thinks of America as this very wealthy place, but, renting housing doesn't mean you're poor. It just means that you've got a different housing choice. So about half the population rents. We've seen a shift from where the developers and private enterprise really created this concept of build to rent. So we have multifamily, which are just large apartment buildings. They're unfurnished. They're just kind of boxes. There's no real kind of community-driven activity, but it's just a place that you rent. But recently we saw a shift to single-family housing in the US. I know this isn't applicable to Hong Kong where you can't build that, but this was something that as people got older, particularly as you address these aging populations, and I think the guys have mentioned also that you have about 55% of the population in Hong Kong own housing. There's almost own it with cash, right? There's no real incentive, as Roger was talking about earlier, to sell in a down market because people have all this equity built up. But what we've seen, a trend, is that people are saying, you know what, I've got this house. I'm now 60 years old. I don't really have kids living there anymore. I'm going to sell it and then rent. But I don't want to live on the 4th floor of some little condo building because I'm not used to that. So a new product was developed in the US called Build to Rent, which is really single-family rental, where you're building entire communities on the ground of these little houses. But nothing's ever sold. And I think that that's a big change. And one of the questions this morning was, does everybody really need to own? And is housing solutions, do they only have to solve for how do I buy my first house? Why don't you rent your first house? Or if you're older and you no longer need a big house, why don't you sell that house and rent where there's community with a lot of people around you with similar ideas and similar kind of lifestyle? And then you don't need to worry about cutting the grass, which is a problem in kind of rural America. But you can have groups of people and a lot of community activity. So I think we've seen a bigger shift to react to both the older generation as well as the young in this community-driven living. And that's one thing that you can really only do in rental housing, because I guarantee everybody who lives here in Hong Kong, if you live on an apartment floor with 8 flats, I would challenge anybody here to put up their hand if they know more than 2 people on their floor, right? Nobody knows. You don't know who even lives next door to you. You might know they have kids because there's a bunch of shoes at the front door that are all little. That's the only thing you know about your neighbors, right? There's no concept of community. And I think that the younger population, particularly that fresh graduate, 25 to 35-year-old contingent, really strives for that community, right? So I think in rental housing, you can create that community because you can curate the building and create the activities, and you don't need the Strata Title Council to approve if you want to have a party at the pool, right? You just do it. And then you can kind of create all these activities every day that actually people don't want to be lonely and stuck in these tiny small flats. They actually want to kind of come out to the common spaces if they could, but then there's no real reason for them, or there's no activity to do it. So I think that's been a big shift that we've noticed in our portfolio over the past 5 years probably. It's very recent, and I think it's something that we can look at here. I think the other is this idea of home ownership, and I think that that's changing amongst the younger population if we focus on that. In that people want to be mobile. The cost of home ownership has gotten too high, which I'll show you some examples later. But it's gotten too high, and like, you're not a loser if you rent your house, right? My mother-in-law tells me I'm a loser because I rent my house because my mother's Chinese, right? So, you know, why haven't I bought her daughter a house, right? Like, why? Why are you renting, Blake? You're giving money to somebody else. That old generation thought is true, right? But today's population, they may want to work in Hong Kong today. They may want to go to New York or London or Los Angeles or Sydney, and the cost of home ownership is so high, particularly the transaction cost. And not to throw the agents under the bus, but you know, when you go and sell your house, the transaction costs of selling are actually very, very high. So you start to think about, is it really worth to own this and buy it and sell it? I'm stuck here, right? And then that population who really wants to be mobile, I think, ends up in this kind of like homeownership trap almost. But I think affordability really is dramatically changing the demographic perception of the young population. It's happening in Asia as well, which is the least kind of rental market outside of Japan. But we're seeing that happening, and it's really driven by affordability. So I think there's a couple, I mean, I've got a lot I can talk about, but that's...
Yeah, but I just so resonate with what you just mentioned, because I remember I got the campaign from our neighbor through the security, because I put the shoes outside the door. And then I apologized to him in person. Then I know his name now. But I also want to stick to you, Ray, about the questions we're just talking about Hong Kong. It's really quite unique. We're talking about the land price, which is very high, and also we have the climate, which is also one of the critical elements that make our development more difficult. So we take the Homa as an example, because as most of the projects they are in Thailand, and how you tackle this sustainability and ESG, and how you put it in your development, in your operation model, that Hong Kong maybe can learn and end up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously all the kind of institutional investors that back us and everybody else probably in this room has this ESG focus, but how do you execute in markets? I think it's a poor excuse if you say that you can't do it, because you know, we're building in a more tropical environment, and all of our buildings are, you know, LEED certified and everything. So it's a poor excuse, I think. One of the problems, though, is that it's driven by developers who are in a for-sale model. So they don't need to be ESG compliant in their housing, because the air conditioning bill next month isn't their problem. So they put in very inefficient, there's air conditioning in the flat, but it may be very, very inefficient, and they don't look at like centralized systems, because all they're worried about is selling that flat today to somebody else, and then it becomes that other person. And to be honest, the market is not mature enough, I don't think, at this point where people are willing to pay more because, well, you've got really fancy Mitsubishi air conditioning in this flat. I'll pay an extra $2,000 for it. They don't even consider it as part of their kind of long term. But when you get larger commercial developers who are building build to rent, you really look at what's the effect. It's like the office developers. I mean, the office developers care what aircon systems they put in, what window systems they put in, and everything else because they're worried about operating costs in 5 years, 7 years down the road. And I think once you get that kind of shift of mindset of just selling off plan versus a long-term holding strategy, you'll really look at, what's the operating cost in 5 years' time, because that's going to drive value, and it creates value. I mean, on every ESG effort that we go through, we do an IRR calculation, like on the windows. Does it make sense to put in these windows versus these windows? Because what's the energy saving going to be? What's that going to translate into electrical cost? And at a 5% cap rate, it's 20 times value every dollar that I can save in operating cost. So you're creating huge value, but you got to think about it 5, 7 years kind of down the road. So that's how we kind of look at it. It definitely takes more money up front in terms of CapEx in order to achieve these ESG goals, but we run it, and almost in every case, whether it's putting in solar, better windows, better air conditioning, and that's just the E side of the ESG. There's also all the S side, right? And the social engineering side and everything else. And when you do these community ideas, what it creates, it's not just charity from the developer saying, let's make everybody happy, right? What happens is when you're a happy tenant or you meet your neighbor with like the little shoes out in the corridor, you become friends. And then if you're there, from our perspective, you're gonna make friends, whether it's playing soccer or badminton together or something, because we curate these events under the kind of the social engineering part of it. They rent again because all their community is already there. The biggest cost in housing for us is if somebody leaves their house, because I need to paint it, I need to rent it, I got to pay either our leasing staff and all these other kinds of things. So there is a kind of a financial analysis around the ESG angle of it as well. But if we can get people to rent one more year, it's a huge cost savings and it makes everybody happier as well. But I don't think that residential tenants are willing to pay more rent because you've got this, $200,000 LEED plaque that sits in the lobby. I don't think they're willing to do that yet. But I can promise you that Prudential or AIG or GIC won't give you the money to build it in a few years' time. They certainly won't give you the money to do it in the US now, and they won't give it to you in Europe for quite a long time already. Asia is still a bit flexible where they're not forcing it, but it's definitely coming. And I think you need to think about it as kind of, it's not a cost. It's almost survival in order to build this stuff if you want to do it in the future.
Thanks. So let's come back to Hong Kong. When we go look at the housing history, actually by 1950, the redevelopment of Mayfield Estate actually shows us the public sector, the public developer is taking a very key role in providing adequate supply for our needs of our population. And when we become wealthier, we can see the private developers develop a lot of luxury apartments, luxury houses. And I would like to see there has not much changes happen for the style of housing up to now. But now we can see there are some changes happening. Some of the private developers, they are looking for opportunities to partnering or to support those private sectors, public sectors to fulfill the needs of some marginal group of Hong Kong people. So I would like to ask the question to Charles first. It's about your experience of the transitional housing project, Nam Cheong 220. Is there anything, the lessons you learned that we can also share with the private developers here in Hong Kong?
Okay. Based upon our project, actually, we know that during these long years, we see that actually quite a lot of the private developers can provide their idle land for the NGO to develop some of the affordable housing. So this idle land may be idle for 10 years or 15 years. Probably they don't find an opportunity to develop or have some sort of the land administration constraint. So they would like to contribute and collaborate with the NGO to using this land for the benefit of the grassroots people. So this phenomenon I recognized or observed this. That's one. And then after, actually we collaborate with Henderson in my project, and in the other project with NGO, they may collaborate with another private sector to develop transition housing. And when we using this idle housing, actually our council plays a role of coordination. We try to build it. Actually, we don't have any knowledge of the construction design, something like that. Okay, but we coordinate with different designer, consultant, and also construction company to build this sort of the transition housing. So we're using a lot of the collaboration in order to achieve this goal. And apart from this, actually, we also using a kind of the model to commission the non-profit organization, a social service organization, to manage the project. Because we think if we only employ the poverty management company to manage the property, they may not help to build the community. They may not help to build a mutual helped community for those grassroots people. So we commissioned the social service organization to do this, allocate the flat, and also assessment the needs of the resident, and then provide the service activities for them to build the community. So we're using this kind of the collaboration to achieve this larger social goal. Okay, larger social goal. And you know that those grassroots people actually live alone, lacking social connection in the subdivided flat. Okay, actually, Hong Kong people in general also lacking this sort of the social connection. Okay, but maybe it is more serious for those grassroots people. So we think we have to connect them. Particularly, we have to connect those community resources to them so that they know there is kind of the different community partner resources they can use to meet their needs. That's one thing. And the second thing is they have to know each other. So we have our operator actually organize different activities for them so that they can know each other when they are in need. They not only look for the social worker to help, but also to their neighbor for help. So there is kind of the mutual help groups. And for example, I have interviewed one of the residents, the elderly, actually looking after their husband in wheelchair, and her child actually has a mental incapacitation, working in the shelter. So every day, these elderly women, only focus upon how to look after her husband and children. So her focus only on that. So you can imagine that she actually has a very high anxiety when their income actually fluctuated, cannot meet some of the needs, basic needs. So, but in living in the social housing, their neighbor sometimes will locking her door and then probably deliver some of the food to her, saying hi to her. And then our social worker can organize some activity and encourage to join the volunteer. So it helps her to distract the attention from her very busy housework. Okay, so this kind of the atmosphere we actually created for all of our grassroots people living in our housing. I think it is quite successful. Okay, so you get this kind of, for the private sector, I think it is added value, and also there's some costly, because we not only recruit the private property management company, but also we recruit one of the NGO to operate this project. And also we put the NGO in a very important role so that he can manage the property management company. In Hong Kong, actually, not only, actually, when we say that we should create a community or housing for happiness, for achieving the goal of happiness, I always watch the YouTube to know what is the happiness. One of the main elements of happiness is the social life. Have a strong social life actually is a very important element. But in Hong Kong, in the private housing, even if I live in my own housing, okay, my own unit, social life, social connection is lacking. Okay, is lacking. There is a couples. There's a lot of activity. You should take initiative to join it and know somebody. But normally we don't know the neighbor much. The connection is very weak. But we do read about it. I think when you become even though all of them are very educated, can look for help from your friends, even though you have this sort of the edge, we have this sort of edge, okay. But when we become for example, your family member may get sick, very sick, okay, dementia or something, assume, then you will get lost, because as a carer, you don't know how to look after them, okay. Then you need somebody for information. So under this situation, if in the housing accommodation, a lot of the professional or the educated people living there, but if they know each other, have a good relationship, then they can get those information faster, even on top of your friends. So I think if the private sector can make reference to our this kind of the anti-poverty project, maybe you can think about whether it is worth to collaborate with NGO to do this sort of the community project works there. And recently, actually, our council tried one project, collaborate with the China Camp. This project is called the Aging Friendly Program. Try to collaborate with the NGO to promote the care food and also the general technology in one of the private housing estate, so that when this housing estate actually live with quite a lot of the elderly. Elderly. So through this project, we can promote the care food and then the general tech and also some of the health knowledge from the district health center to the resident. Then they know how to get those information, look after their parents. I think it is quite useful if this kind of the collaboration partnership can build, then it make this kind of the housing product more value.
Thank you, Charles. And as a real estate professional, we always advise our client when they have a project to invest or to develop, what is the financial return? It's all about the business case. So the question to Paul is, when Charles mentioned a lot about the community, the people element, how it can factor in the Hong Kong long-term housing strategy or the longer plan for the Hong Kong society?
I think it's very important, to make our place as a place that we like to stay, livable, with enjoyment as well. I think when you mention about the people have a choice, to rent or to buy. And unfortunately, I think in Hong Kong, I think we always make compromise. It's not really a choice. I mean, do I have a choice to buy? I do not have enough 30% down payment. So I have to make the compromise, right? And then when I have to rent, I mean, if my wages are so low, I mean, I only have to make the compromise. I may have to stay in the subdivided flat. And then when we go to Charles, when you talk about the social housing, I always believe this ESG, that's a social, I think there's something that I think we have to look deep and hard. Now, what does this social mean? You know? I think there's a lot of people after they do the accounting and after they do the financing, I can make that much profit, then I'm going to go for it. If not, then I'm sorry. I mean, that's not what I want to do. I do hope, I think the developer or the property, I think when we look at the ESG, it's really look beyond the profit. It is really, while you are making your profit, how can you make a place which is really some place that the people can promote this sort of social connectivities in the community. I mean, we can see this so very, what do you call it? This tiny flat, which is just like a hotel room, which is just 220 square feet, and it was sold nearly $10 million, I think, near the Hong Kong University. You know? I think that sort of places, it is not conducive. I mean, for any interaction. I mean, the place, just the people, they work, and then they come, and then they just leave, and that's not conducive. I was in Beijing last week, and I can see the good old time. I mean, they go say hub yu, you know, there's four. They actually have a common courtyard. The people they can go there, they can intermingle, and then that is what we call living. I think in Hong Kong, I think we are not. We do not live. I'm sorry. I think we all say the people here, we survive. I mean, when people ask, how are you doing? You know, we're surviving. You know? I think we really, instead of we work to live, I think we live to work. Very pathetic in Hong Kong. I mean, we have very long hours, big mortgage, up to 45 or 50% of the money we pay the mortgage. And actually, our whole opportunity of the city or the life trajectory of our young people was being so distorted. Because once you lock in a mortgage, especially if you're working for the bank, and then even your boss is so harsh to you, you don't want to change because you will not enjoy this very favorable the interest rate. So I think the whole thing, I mean, make Hong Kong not very innovative. It is also because of this sort of the property prices. So I do hope, I think with the developer, you're so kind-hearted, you know, I mean, just give the opportunity to your company, give the opportunity to the user. I think really we like to live in a place that everybody is happy. There's no point we have the lunch in the highest Regency, everybody looks good, very happy. But when you walk out from the high agency, when you saw so many poor people on the street, would you be happy? You would not, right? So I do hope, I think a bit more social responsibility, participate in the social housing, and then really to build a Hong Kong which is we are proud of. And then just a gentleman told me, how do we define Hong Kong? You know, Hong Kong doesn't mean to be just Chinese. No, I think it's a Hong Kong is a place that we share the problem, we cherish, I think, every opportunity. I mean, that is what is Hong Kong. This is what Hong Kong that we are proud of. No? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So let's move on to talk about the housing options. So we see so many new areas of the housing options, such as service apartments, student accommodations, senior living, and we have the build-to-rent, co-living, and also multifamily. So Right. You have a 23 years experience in real estate industry. May I ask you to give us a real estate 101 lesson? So what's the difference between co-living, build to rent, and multifamily?
Right. So, I mean, I think what we're trying to solve for are a lot of these kind of community-led events. Co-living has kind of recently established itself as a solution to very small rooms, but really good common area and amenity space to kind of force people, like people are miserable in their room because it's not even 220 square feet, it's maybe like 130 or something. So it's really a place to sleep, but then the inclusion of common kitchens where you can kind of meet other people, or fitness, wellness. We found across all income spectrums that everybody at the end of the day wants to have clean air, healthy living, and be relatively healthy. Whether you're rich or poor, those are like three main drivers. So in a lot of these co-living places, you will find very small rooms that force people out, but then you go into, really good gyms, fitness, and really clean air. Those are kind of drivers of co-living. Build to rent is simply kind of instead of building condominiums, you are building, it's a commercial landlord, just like an office building. You're building it, you're going to hold it long term. It's more institutional. It obviously requires a very different funding source, and that's something we didn't have a chance to talk about. But it's really kind of more capital markets driven, where you're holding these properties for long periods of hold time. And then BTR, multifamily is just rental housing it's a very American term. And I mean, I'm not American, but we use it. But it's the traditional rental housing with limited service, if any, and you're just, but it's all owned by one commercial landlord, maybe 300-400 apartments, and it's not that there's multiple families in each unit. I think that's a misconception here. Just think about it as like one whole building, 400 apartments, whether that's low rise or high rise. There's multiple families in the building, but there are not multiple families in each unit. Maybe that's the simple way to do it, but.
Thank you, very clear. Thanks for your lecture. So let's go back to the Hong Kong. So we see there is a more popular for the developer to go into the student accommodation sector. And it is with the concept and idea of co-living. So taking Homer as an example, I want to know the secret, the winning formula. So what is the design and management elements in your model that it is called a winning formula?
All right, I think we're going to run out of time, so maybe we should go to this. We made a few slides that we can share with you guys. I'm going to stand because I'm not going to be able to see it since there's no presentation here. But how do I advance it? So I think what we look for is everything that we spoke about, that Paul and Charles have raised, right? We need supportive demographics, this urbanization that's occurring. This is Thailand specific, but I think it applies to all the markets. I mean, people don't realize, people think Thailand's cheap, but when you have 27 times price to income ratio in Bangkok, housing is very unaffordable. This idea of, we talked about earlier as well with Wendy, and we're going to try to wrap up, I think, everything we spoke about and try to roll it into this thesis of what is the change for housing. But, sharing economies, remote work, all of those kind of things create a shift in kind of creating this opportunity, and I think something everybody should look at. And this is both for government, private sector, public sector, to work together, given that these are the demand drivers that exist there, right? You've got all these problems, how are you going to kind of solve for it? There's way too much words on here, but this was kind of our solution at the end of the day. But I think one thing on here which was quite interesting is this idea of this concept called Board of Investment. So how can government play a role? In Thailand, it was quite unique that they gave us 100% foreign ownership of the land in all of our projects because we were creating something they wanted. So there was no subsidy in place, like in the US markets, there's tax subsidies, which is one thing that maybe you could look at in Hong Kong. land subsidies, given the government owns the land here? Could you do what China's done and create a rental-only auction where there's restrictive use on particular pieces of land, which would command a different price point than for sale housing? In Thailand, we got a lot of this exemption on foreign ownership was big, given that you're not allowed to own land as a foreigner in Thailand. But also there was a bunch of tax breaks in terms of import duty, and they also provide, depending on where we build in the country, they provide also income tax breaks for 10 years. So those are some kind of policy initiatives that maybe the government can kind of think about. I think one of the things is, it works, right? Like we kind of created this science experiment. Would it work in a market? And people say, well, this is Thailand, it's different than here. But everybody told us it wouldn't work. They literally thought I was crazy. They're like, Blake, save your money. No one's going to show up. Don't build it. Just sell condos like everybody else. I was like, no, this will work, right? I don't know why the clicker doesn't work. That's what doesn't work. Driving all of these things that we all spoke about, Paul and Charles, we mentioned these things, sustainability, community. How do you, incorporate technology into it? This, and what we find in also people working 2-3 days from home, 2-3 days in the office. I think in Hong Kong it's probably more like 5 days in the office and 2 days at home because everybody works 24/7. But there's still this concept of how do you, again, change design perhaps in the housing units where they're small, but you create co-working spaces like kind of like a WeWork type event downstairs where everybody who doesn't want to work beside their screaming kids can go and get some kind of peace and quiet. And I think, you start to look at what amenities do you put into the project. We can skip this one. And I think, we've got different screens on different pages. I'm getting confused. I think the idea of this community really is important. So, again, we talked about fitness and wellness. Regardless of income, people want to be healthy. So how do we create spaces, which is not, the unit on the second floor that nobody could sell and you throw 2 treadmills in it and say that that's the fitness facility. You really need to think holistically that these people are living in very small spaces. How do you create common spaces? Almost force them out of their rooms to bump into other people, because when they do that, they become friends, and as Paul was mentioning, that happiness factor starts to kind of interact where then, and as Charles said, you can rely then on your neighbors because you've met each other a few times at these different events. One of the advantages of, again, owning the whole buildings is that you can create a lot of networking events, and whether that's for single mothers who don't know what to do with their kid after school. I mean, it doesn't just have to be kind of luxury cocktails on the rooftop, right? I mean, you can create it for all different kinds of income levels. I mean, in some of our properties in the US, one of the biggest amenities that we put in was after-school programs for the kids, because all the parents are working. And what does Johnny do when he gets off the school bus, right? He's got 3 hours with no parents at home. Very good chance in a low-income environment he's going to get into trouble. He's going to hang around with the wrong people, especially in kind of a US context. There's crime, there's kind of bad things that can happen. So we created these after school, we worked with an NGO group who sends teachers where Johnny can put his hand up in kind of in a small environment and say, I need help with my math. I was too embarrassed at school to put my hand up, but here I can do it. All of a sudden now Johnny or Sarah or whoever is doing better at school, less phone calls from mom who's working at a cashier at Walmart who can't leave her job, and if she leaves again to go down kind of get him at school, she's going to get in trouble and lose her job, and this kind of vicious cycle in that kind of working class poverty kind of continues. This just shows that the financing works. And when you look at what people generally have to buy to kind of survive, like if you're in that, maybe the young professional crowd, let's get out of kind of like the low income crowd, but that 25 to 35-year-old crowd, everybody thinks, well, you're a little bit more expensive than everybody else. But when you look at what you actually have to pay for, it actually becomes a kind of a cheaper solution, again, because we can kind of bulk buy a lot of this stuff and kind of create This thing doesn't work. So next. This is, again, people said we couldn't build it. We're now the largest multifamily operator in Thailand. We operate at about 95% occupancy level. Very similar, there's a very good project here in Hong Kong called that Weave. We had a housing council here. It's a couple stations further up into the countryside. And I would strongly recommend you go take a look at that as well. That's really addressing these 80,000 people who are showing up, mostly Chinese students who need a place to live. And again, that community-driven idea. But this doesn't look like affordable housing to me, but really it's very affordable. I mean, our average rents are about $700. So it's quite affordable, but with a little bit of architecture, a little bit of design, you can create, quite good stuff that people enjoy and are happy to be around and live in. And then, next one. We talked about the ESG stuff already. It's critical. You can do it even in affordable housing. You still need to bring these kind of ideas into play. And I think everybody, should put that forefront in their work. Next one. And this is something we're very proud of, and given that we're a ULI, we got the recognition for trying to kind of be this first mover, and we won the Award of Excellence this year for the project. And I think that's probably it. It's just next one. And then what we'll, we can provide these slides for anybody who kind of wants it, but we don't need that one, that's for sure. But we'll finish up and kind of wrap it all together. And I think, one of the very interesting things that we have is this community engagement, is that our tenants are actually so happy to be there and they're part of it. They actually promote the product for us. We don't really advertise, but the tenants advertise, and they create all these videos about, maybe this is an Instagrammer thing and I'm just too old to do this, but how cool their life is living here. And if they create these reels, and they're kind of their community, so that they can kind of like brag to their friends that they're in this affordable housing project, which I don't think has ever happened before. But I'll show you an example of one that some guys made. And it's only 1 minute. It's very short. We cut it down, but this is from one of our tenants who made this. Really that inclusion of all these community spaces, the kids, the evening entertainments that all of these people like, the fact that a bunch of guys wanted to play soccer, the community events that we're able to put together, kind of all wrap up together in something that creates people generally a happier place to live. And that was, when your own tenants are doing your advertising for you, I think, it's not supposed to turn into an ad about Homa, guys. Sorry about that. But it's really about, like, when your tenants promote your own product, I think they're happy. And I think it can be done in a market where we were told it could never be done. And I think that there's, so don't think that, it's Hong Kong, it's impossible to do it, right? I think the guys at Weave have done a great job. And somebody said that they couldn't do it in Hong Kong, or Dash Living as well. Like, there's new innovation that's happening, repurposing some of these old buildings, and I think this community-driven, it's not solving the, cage flat type of housing, right? That's another issue that I think, but in this segment of your migration into Hong Kong, of all these young students and everybody who's moving here, and now you've got net migration, it solves maybe that segment of a lot of the young people, so.
Thank you. 10 minutes presentation. Thank you. I thought there's only 2 slides on this, but really a lot of information, and make me to start to plan my Phuket visit next time. So I think before we open up to the question to the floor, I would like to ask last question, because this is really the topic that really close to my heart, is about the elderly population. They are also the very valuable asset in our society as well. So because JLL, we issue a white paper on senior living in Hong Kong and GBA. And sadly, we didn't see a lot of supply in terms of the senior living products in Hong Kong. So the question I would like maybe to Paul is, what is missing? Because what the government, Hong Kong government is talking about is aging in place, or you can retire in GBA cities. So why we cannot have the development of better senior living products in Hong Kong? What's your view on this?
I think we have to look at the socio-economic profile of our elderly population now. I think based on the poverty report, I think we are talking about nearly 30-something% of the elderly population, they're being classified called poor. Of course, there's some people say they're asset rich, they're income poor, right? But anyway, I think the present elderly population, they do financially not that healthy. The incoming one might be better because we have the this financial this retirement fund. It has been kicked in, I think, about 30 years ago. But now I think the elderly population, they would be better. I still think that there are a lot of concern of the elderly that if they go to the Greater Bay Area, I think they're concerned about the medical. I mean, they're also about their transport. I mean, just meeting their children or their grandchildren in Hong Kong. I mean, if that can be addressed, I think that will remove some of the barriers. I think for the elderly, I think if they move to the Greater Bay Area, and actually that will release some of the housing need in Hong Kong, they mitigate some of the pressure of the housing need in Hong Kong too. But I still think that we should give the Hong Kong people a choice and not a compromise, a genuine choice, whether if I decided with that amount of money, I would do better. I think in the Greater Bay Area, yes, please remove the barriers and help them to move them happily. But if they do seriously, you would like to do the aging in place, please provide the infrastructure and support. But at this moment, they are talking about aging in place. But there are so many services it has not, I think, addressed, the need. So that's why it had been caught in the middle, and then the government spending a lot of money in the institution to buying places from this so-called substandard elderly home, which is not good for anyone. I mean, but the government is paying money. You're paying a lot of money to subsidize this, but they are not haven't got the value for the money. So I think if whatever you come up, I mean, you can convert them in an elderly housing, I think that would be good. I mean, like the community housing, the remortgaging, I think these we need to think more creatively, but we do have to understand the concern of our elderly first. I think nothing about them without them. Let them speak. Let their voice to be heard. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Paul. So let's open to the floor. Sorry, this time is, so maybe we take one question. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to follow up on Professor Yip's point about elderly housing and then segue that into the previous gentleman's product. So we can build all the hardware we need. Government can do that, private sector, we can do that. But I think we saw in the Thailand projects that the software side really makes the difference. The problem that I've seen over a long period in Hong Kong, Professor Yip, is that the service side traditionally has come from the government. It's subsidized, NGOs. Once you get into private sector, the cost structure is different. And then the consumer, I think, sorry, I forgot your name, but your customers are willing to pay that premium. So I'm just wondering, for the seniors, asset-rich, income-poor, are they willing to pay that premium to attain that lifestyle which you're offering young people? And I don't have the answer to this. I'm just wondering, the panel, what solutions? I mean, Hong Kong Council of Social Service, you're doing that, but you're non-profit. So I'm wondering, for the private sector, how can customers afford that kind of premium or that kind of service fee that will allow them to have the kind of lifestyle that we're all talking about? Software question.
I think from our perspective, if you don't provide the right software at the right cost, people won't show up, right? So if you take the elderly population that's very asset rich and you look at how do we look at providing maybe retirement housing, and maybe not like medically enabled retirement housing, but just that 70-year-old active lifestyle housing, sell your flats, you know, give them investment product effectively that they can put their, you know, $100 that they earn from selling the flat into, which will then provide kind of an income stream. But if the services that are provided aren't good enough, they'll move. So I think right now that there's no choice, right? As you know, Paul has mentioned several times, everybody's compromising in every single case. There's not really a pure choice. If you can get enough kind of product in the market, I think there would be choice. And then without the proper services provided at the right price, and it's not a profit grab. It's you're providing services in a free marketplace, so it should equalize, I would think.
I think this elderly thing, because we are talking about, we have about 1.5 million, I think, of elderly age 65 now. And this group of elderly, they are very heterogeneous as well. So I think what we really need to do is just do some good pilot study, become a showcase, I think, to convince the elderly that it doesn't hurt you, it doesn't cost much, and actually your quality of life, I think, can be changed. So I think what we really want to see is some good practices model. But at this moment, I think we do not have enough of this, I think, to be able, I think, to convince this elderly. And unfortunately, I think our life expectancy is going to get longer and longer. We are not going to die, you know, we are going to live forever. You know? So you are going to have a lot of people, they live longer, they are not healthier, but these are the people you still have to address. They are financial, not very strong. They're physically, they are not quite well, they're quite fractured, their social support are not that good. We still have a group of people, I think they're really structurally being trapped in this, and then we have to do something about this.
Actually, the pilot project of elderly housing is done by the Hong Kong Housing Society. And then I know that the recent project actually has got a very strong demand. I think it's kind of the elderly population, they can afford to buy this kind of the housing services. Yes, and actually we have talked about this question before. If the service actually in the private sector, it is a money. When we doing the community service activity, this kind of the medical one, it is kind of money. So, but housing society project may demonstrate one of the, there is a ocean, blue ocean or red ocean, ocean here. Probably we can try it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you also. So I think that's to conclude the panel discussion for this morning. So I think we all have many takeaways from this panel. So my takeaway is, even though we have so many changing needs of our demographics and our population in Hong Kong, but what is more important is always the people, is the people element. We heard about community, the neighborhood, the bondings, the engagement. So this is really that can transform a house into our home. So I hope you all have some takeaway from our morning discussion. And thank you so much for all your insights. Thank you.